Guilty the van driver who plotted to kill a US serviceman on British soil. Junaid Khan, a supporter of so-called Islamic State, planned to crash a car outside a US airbase and attack any American who came to his aid.
As a result of the escalation in both what we say extremism and the plot, we had to intervene early.
Save our steel! Save our steel!
Also tonight, Tata steel workers in Wales want guarantees, but all they get is warm words from the business secretary.
The living wage rise for more than 1 million that the government's own number crunchers say could cost jobs. And
I have to tell you today that Denise, our beloved Denise Robertson, has lost her battle with cancer.
A source of kindness and reassurance for decades, TV agony aunt Denise Robertson has died.
This is the ITV Evening News with Alistair Stewart and Ranveer Singh.
good evening. Junaid Khan modelled his intended crime on the murder of Lee Rigby, motivated by his support for so-called Islamic State. He planned a car crash outside one of the US air bases he regularly drove by in his delivery van, and then to kill any American who came to his aid.
The jury heard how Khan had been encouraged by a notorious British-born Islamic State fanatic in Syria. He was also convicted, along with his uncle, of planning to go to Syria to join the ranks of IS. Martha Fairley was in court.
Junaid Khan poses smugly with the black flag used by the so-called Islamic State. The delivery driver from Luton used his job to scope out US Air Force bases in East Anglia as he planned a terror attack on British soil. His plot was to stage a car crash on the main road outside RAF Lakenheath or Mildenhall and behead an American soldier, emulating the murder of Lee Rigby.
As a result of the escalation in both what we say extremism and the plot, we had to intervene early.
The 25-year-old had shared his plan with Junaid Hussain, an extremist who'd travelled from Birmingham to fight in Syria with IS. On July the 5th, using an encrypted app, Hussain encouraged Junaid Khan to attack soldiers. Most soldiers live in bases which are protected, he said. I suppose on the road is the best idea. When I saw these US soldiers on the road, it just looked simple, Khan replied. But I had nothing on me or would have got into an accident with them and made them get out of the car. That's what the brother done with Lee Rigby, Hussain said. Junaid Khan began to make a list of items he'd need and researched how to make a pressure cooker bomb to carry in a backpack and detonate as a suicide bomb. He searched online for this combat knife, prompting police to arrest him on July the 14th. Hussain was killed in a US drone strike in the Syrian town of Raqqa 6 weeks later. Junaid and his 23-year-old uncle Shazib Khan had been planning to travel to Syria to fight with IS or Daesh and had been known to police for a year. After their arrest, counter-terrorism officers found as many as 65,000 text messages between them and fighters in Syria.
The communications were actually key in this case, and we presented a vast amount of digital media in this particular case. So text messages, emails, communication via encrypted applications on social media. And that evidence presented actually provided the link to the two individuals here in the UK to a Daesh fighter out in Syria.
Junaid had earlier been approached by officers from Prevent, the government's anti-terror programme, but attempts to de-radicalise him failed. Instead, he's been convicted of preparing acts of terrorism in the UK and will be sentenced on May the 13th. Martha Fairley, ITV News.
And our correspondent Juliet Bremner joins us live now from Washington. Juliet, what's the US government said about today's verdict?
Well, Alistair, at the US defence briefing at the Pentagon this morning, they said that this plot just underlined the dangers posed by individuals in Syria towards their own home country. Men like Junaid Hussain, who had gone to Syria, was not in the UK, but was still able to orchestrate this attack. Both the UK and the US say that they had good intelligence linking Hussain and the convicted man Khan, and they make absolutely no apology for the targeted killing. In fact, speaking from Baghdad, the spokesman told me that this is just part of a continued campaign to eliminate this kind of threat.
We know these operatives are planning operations outside of Iraq and Syria, which is why we target them. And it's why we're going to continue to target them. It's why we're going to continue to work very closely with all of our partners and allies in this region.
I think it shows just how good the US intelligence out in Syria and Iraq is at the moment. They've had quite a number of these drone sites successfully targeting people in the IS leadership. They got the number 2 just last week. We don't hear a lot about it in the UK, but they are determined to continue, saying they will carry on trying to hunt them down until they have everyone.
Juliet, thank you.
Here, 3 whole days after the steel crisis erupted in the government's face, finally the business secretary drove into Port Talbot today. Sajid Javid, who said he had rushed back from his trade trip to Australia to deal with the crisis, described his talks at the plant as constructive. But scores of steel workers gathered outside the plant demanding answers. Rupert Evelyn is in Port Talbot for us tonight. Rupert.
Well, it's fair to say the business secretary might not have been looking forward to his trip here, summoned back from a black tie dinner in Australia to an even darker mood and into the fire here in South Wales. But one union official who met with Sajid Javid this evening said to me that he was optimistic, although all sides admit tonight that there is still no plan, to coin a phrase, to save our steel.
It's taken 3 days, the cancellation of a business trip come holiday and a missed flight. But finally, the government have got the business secretary to Port Talbot and face to face with those workers who are fighting for their livelihoods.
Have we got an industry? Have we got an industry?
The industry is absolutely vital to the future of UK industrial sector.
Sajid Javid told workers he and the government have already saved the steelworks by buying more time from Tata. But they want more than his words here, and so far he can't deliver.
Is this site saved yet?
There's a process, and the most important next step, which we all agree on, everyone I've talked to today, which is the Welsh government, the unions, Tata itself, is that whichever buyer that comes forward, the government, the UK government and the Welsh government for that matter, we will work closely with them to help sustain a long-term future.
There isn't yet.
Well,
you haven't got an answer yet, have you?
The process has begun, but I'm confident that when that begins, and with our involvement, that we will see a process that works for everyone.
The Conservative government and South Wales steelworkers are not natural allies. But right now, however uncomfortable it may be, they need each other.
We need help from the government and from the British suppliers and things. We need that sort of help. No handouts. We don't want that. We don't want charity, nothing at all. Just want an even playing field.
We've come to show the Minister how important this is to us. I think we need to show support for whatever the management and union officials are discussing in there. And, you know, we want him to see the faces of the people that are going to suffer if this plant closes.
Save our steel! Save our steel!
The message to the government is clear and unequivocal. But as the business secretary finally gets back to business, it is also clear that the same livelihoods he came to help are still on the line. Rupert Evelyn, ITV News, Port Talbot.
Well, while the business secretary was under pressure in South Wales, as Rupert just reported, the government as a whole faced damaging allegations over its role in the lead-up to the crisis.
It's been accused of being the ringleader in blocking EU moves to impose tougher tariffs on cheap Chinese steel. More now from our political correspondent, Romilly Weeks.
With Port Talbot and Tata's other UK plants living on borrowed time, the government is fighting accusations it failed to take measures that would have thrown a lifeline to the British steel industry. Cheap Chinese steel has been pouring into Europe. Some European countries have been pushing for tariffs to stop the flow, allegedly blocked by the UK.
They are leading a blocking minority in the European Council. The British government is right there. They can make it faster, and they can make the tariffs bigger to defend against unfair dumping from other countries, including China.
Demand for tariffs follow claims that heavily subsidised Chinese steel is being dumped here at a loss. Chinese steel imports cost £465 a tonne, compared to £715 for EU-produced steel. Normal EU rules cap tariffs on steel from outside Europe at just 13%. But America, for example, has hit back at China with massive tariffs of up to 256% on Chinese steel imports. The Chancellor, who on a recent visit to China pledged to be Beijing's best partner in the West, has dismissed claims the British government is putting business with China ahead of the need to save jobs on the line at Tata.
Internationally, we're working to make sure that there are tariffs on unfair, cheap imports. Domestically, we're doing everything we practically can, everything we possibly can to help the steelworkers, to help the steel industry.
Just 2 months ago, Tata told MPs of the pressing need to tackle cheap Chinese steel.
The steel import prices into the UK are at an unsustainable level that no industry, whether it be in the UK or Europe, can sustain. Hence why we need to stop and take action on the imports.
The failure to take that action in the EU has increased the heat on the government, already looking like it went AWOL in Tata's hour of need. The government argues that it does support some increase in tariffs, but pushing for very high tariffs like those in the US would damage the economy as a whole. And it is true that industries like car making and shipbuilding are pretty reliant on cheap steel. It's a delicate balancing act, but one that the government hasn't managed to balance in Tata's favour.
Romilly, thank you.
A teenager who stabbed a fellow pupil to death in a school fight over a biscuit was locked up for 9 years today. 16-year-old Bailey Gwynne was knifed in the chest at the Cults Academy in Aberdeen last October. His killer, who cannot be named for legal reasons, was last month convicted of culpable homicide, that is the Scottish equivalent of manslaughter.
And a British woman has been released after spending more than 2 years in prison in Peru for trying to smuggle drugs out of the country. Michaela McCollum on the left and Melissa Reid were jailed in 2013.
More than 1 million people on low wages got a pay rise today when the government's new national living wage came into force. It was announced by the Chancellor last summer for people who are at least 25, and it replaces the minimum wage. But critics say it'll cost thousands of jobs, as our political correspondent Lewis Vaughan-Jones reports.
7, 8.
Along with the building blocks, wages are going up here at this nursery in South Wales. It means staff like Kylie Marie Evans now get an extra 50 pence per hour.
The pay will make a difference to me at the end of the month, a big difference, as long as the cost of living don't go up as well.
The costs for the business certainly will increase.
Oh, no, not quite.
The boss says nursery fees may have to rise.
It's going to affect over 50% of our staff, which means it's going to be a massive increase to our wage bill, about 38,000 to 40,000 a year. We're going to have to find more to cover our wage bill.
From today, workers aged 25 and over must be paid at least £7.20 per hour. An estimated 1.3 million people will get an immediate pay rise. The government wants to go further and raise the national living wage to £9 an hour by 2020. But independent analysts warn that some 60,000 jobs could go as companies struggle to pay the new higher wages.
The government's new national living wage becomes law.
So the announcement in last year's budget may not be quite as positive as advertised. Local councils say they'll struggle with bigger wage bills, and the Labour Party says for many, the extra money won't outweigh government cuts.
Hands up, not a handout.
On top of all that, people's bills may also be rising today. In England, council tax for many will be higher, as will prescription charges and stamp duty on buy-to-let properties. The Chancellor said he wanted to give the country a pay rise, and he has to some extent. But there's another group who are also feeling a bit richer. Yes, MPs themselves today are getting a salary increase of nearly £1,000. Lewis Vaughan-Jones, ITV News, Westminster.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News. Clearing the last obstacles to the Rio Olympics. A special report on the controversy around the Summer Games.
And making a point why these quick-thinking children were helping the police. Find out how after this short break.
Welcome back. With just 5 months to go before the Rio Olympics and the Paralympics, the race is on to get ready for the world's biggest event. The sporting venues are almost finished, but the same can't be said for the city's vital transport links. The total cost for the staging of the Rio Games is currently estimated at around £8.2 billion. There are 32 different sporting venues across the city, at the heart of which is the 185-acre Barra Olympic Park. But the 9-mile extension to Rio's metro system, hoped to carry 230,000 passengers a day, is not yet completed. Our sports editor Steve Scott has this second special report on the run-up to Rio.
Rio's heart isn't difficult to find, but apart from the occasional photo opportunity for tourists, you wouldn't really know it was about to stage the world's biggest sporting showpiece. Unless, that is, you're one of the 50 remaining families living in Villa Autodromo, a rundown favela bordering the Olympic Park. It's been Augusto Borges' home for 25 years, but now the government wants to force everyone out. This is a big problem for us, he says. Living next door to this is unbearable. Optimistically, perhaps, renovations are continuing at the church. Inside, the pews are piled high with furniture belonging to those whose homes have already been demolished. Despite the alternatives being offered on a regular basis, there is a hard core of families in this neighbourhood who is refusing to move voluntarily. Simply put, they do not trust what the government is promising them. And that is down to demolition raids, residents claiming on occasions they've returned home to rubble and heartache. Sandra Maria is another who says she's suffering in the name of the Olympics. The Olympics has been the perfect excuse for the government to move people from their communities, she told me. But in the long term, it's the poorer communities, the government insists, who will benefit most from the money spent on the Games and the legacy they leave. It's a difficult argument given the depth of recession here, a recession that has squeezed Olympic budgets too. So much so, it has even led to fitting fewer seats at some of the venues. But getting fans to these seats might be the biggest headache of all. The new metro link to the Olympic Park is still unfinished, and if it isn't ready on time, the only alternative public transport will be by bus on Rio's already traffic-choked roads. It's an alternative one boss from the organising committee told me he'd rather not contemplate.
We focus always on the plan A. We realize that in some cases preparing a plan B would take the energy out of the plan A. So we are focused on the plan A. The plan A is the subway, and we have daily assurance by the state government that the subway will be ready for the Games.
It is a scenario that not only no doubt keeps Andrada awake at night, but the thousands of construction workers toiling non-stop to safeguard the smooth running of the Games and this city's reputation. Steve Scott, ITV News, Rio de Janeiro.
The number of people in the UK diagnosed with the deadly blood infection sepsis is on the rise. The latest figures from the Sepsis Trust show a 13% increase this year. 120 adults and 4 children die from the disease every day. That is more than 40,000 people a year.
And the Queen will light the first of a chain of 1,000 beacons stretching across Britain and the world on her 90th birthday this month. Her plans on the big day, the 21st of April, also include a walkabout near Windsor Castle.
It is not easy being confidant and advisor to people's most personal worries on the goldfish bowl of television. The fact that Denise Robertson managed that so well and with such good humour was reflected in today's many emotional tributes. Her death at the age of 83 was particularly keenly felt on ITV's This Morning programme. Sally Lockwood reports.
Beloved Denise Robertson has lost her battle with cancer.
Agony aunt to the nation. Denise Robertson had been on the show from the very beginning. And fighting back tears, today her TV family paid tribute.
She was not only the queen of the agony aunt, she was royalty to us. A wonderful world it may be, but it seems a little less wonderful to all of us today.
It's kind of a sense of relief when Denise gets here, actually. You know, it's like mum's come to sort everything out.
Denise helped countless people with their problems for 3 decades.
What?
You're
You're locked in your house?
Yeah. I think you honestly have to ring the police and tell them that you are locked in the house.
This woman, who'd never been able to stand up to her husband before, did. The police arrested him. This woman got out on under, she went to a refuge, and she said many months later, or even years later, that was the day, that was the first day of the rest of her life. And that was Denise. She made a difference.
Denise always said that misfortunes in her own life qualified her for her role as an agony aunt.
I think you're brilliant at sorting out people's problems. But who do you turn to when you have a problem?
Well, I have to be honest, it's Lily. And
But viewers also knew her for her sense of fun.
sometimes, if I have to call her in the middle of the night, she's a little bit short with me.
You know, it'd be 2 or 3 in the morning, and I'll hear her on the answer phone. Are you there? Are you there?
Today, Denise's family said the world has lost an extraordinary woman. The incalculable numbers of people she has helped and causes she has championed during her 83 years will be grieving with us at this intensely painful time. Awarded an MBE in 2006 for services to broadcasting and charity, Denise was passionate about helping the public, be it personal or political.
Almost every letter to me begins with, "You are my last resort." I don't want to be their last resort.
Her ability to connect with people had no boundaries. This phone call from singer George Michael perhaps says it all.
I've never met you, but I'd just like to tell you I think you're a real diamond.
Denise Robertson was a mother figure to the nation and helped transform so many lives.
TV agony aunt Denise Robertson, whose death was announced today.
And finally, we had to bring you this, and we promise you the footage you're about to see is not an April Fool, Al. It was taken by a police helicopter circling above a field in Surrey, hunting a pair of suspected burglars.
So, watch this group of quick-thinking children and grown-ups forming a human arrow to point police in the right direction. They'd been taking part in an Easter egg hunt. 2 men were later arrested.
Incredible stuff. It was like an Enid Blyton adventure, wouldn't it? That's all from us. Raggy Omar will be here with the news at 10.
From both of us, bye-bye.